Hello, Earthlings, and welcome back to my space where we talk about true crime. On April 30th, Mica Miller would call 911 to tell dispatchers that she was about to take her own life. Mica would ask the dispatcher to track her location so they could inform her family. Before the dispatcher could talk to Mica, she hung up the phone. When the dispatcher couldn't get a hold of Mica, they would inform the police about the situation. Eventually, authorities would locate Mica's car at Lumber River State Park, where authorities would discover a gun case in the passenger seat and ammo in the center console after a search of her vehicle. A receipt that was found in the vehicle would show that both those items had been bought that very day. While authorities were searching Mica's car, a fisherman who was on the lake would approach authorities. This fisherman would state that they heard cries and then a gunshot. This person would also state that they found a bag at the edge of the water, and inside the bag would be a Bible, $500, and Micah's license. The fisherman would also tell police officers that they did not see nor find anything else. Not too long after this, 911 would receive a phone call about a dead body at Lumber River State Park. Authorities would find two spent casings along with a live round on the bank of the river. The body was reported to be submerged in the river bedside tree limbs approximately 100 feet away from the casings. The body then would be taken to the medical examiner where it was later identified as Mica Miller. Mica Miller had married John Paul Miller in 2018, but by October of 2023, the couple had filed for divorce. John Paul would make a statement mentioning how Mica struggled from mental health and mentions how Mica died from taking her own life. The only thing about this statement was that the medical examiner had not released her cause of death yet. On the very day that John Paul made his statement, Mica's sister, Sierra Francis, applied to be the special administrator of Mica's estate. Sierra claimed that because of John Paul, Mica experienced violence and abuse. Sierra would explain that Mica even warned her family that if she ended up with a bullet in her head, that it wasn't her, it was John Paul. Sierra would eventually be granted as special administrator over Mica's estate. 4 days later, the autopsy would be released, and it would be determined that Mica died from a gunshot wound to her head. The autopsy also indicated that they found no signs that Mica endured any type of physical struggle. Digging into Mica's past, it would be discovered that Mica had been involuntarily committed to a hospital for 48 hours. Mica will later go on to believe that John Paul had put her in that hospital under false pretenses and while she was hospitalized had stolen her car. Mica would talk to police on several occasions due to the fact that somebody was following her. She had reported to police that somebody had slashed her tires and that her stalker had even approached her at a gas station. Mica would even discover that her car had a GPS tracking location put on it when she took her car to the mechanics to get it fixed, and the mechanics had found it and informed her. Mica would agree to talk to police in regards to the GPS tracking device that was found. Mica was so afraid for her life that she wanted to put out a restraining order against this person. And while she was outside of the magistrate's office with an officer, this particular officer noticed a car that was driving suspiciously slow. And when he pointed it out, Mica pointed out that that was her stalker. When the vehicle would notice, however, they would speed up and drive off. Mica and John Paul would be issued a summons to appear in a court regarding a civil case in which Mica was seeking a restraining order against John Paul. Authorities would look into John Paul's whereabouts the day that Mica passed. They would discover that John Paul was not even in North Carolina the day that Mica passed. They would discover that John Paul was traveling with a woman that he was romantically involved with, and they determined that that woman was also not in North Carolina the day that Mica passed. Authorities believe that the evidence that Mica unalived herself is pretty clear and convincing. Though authorities feel this way, Mica's family doesn't. Michael Francis, who is Mica's father, would state, "I believe it was all staged. I believe that the whole thing was premeditated. I believe that the narrative was established by John Paul all the way through before there was even a release. Like the day we were notified, he was already saying she did it. Why would you do that if you don't have all the information yet?" The bank where the bird boxes and stuff are is where the shell casings and such were found. And the gun was found in the water. And then her body was about 40 meters away, and the water there doesn't flow at all. It's just stagnant. We have a video that I provided that shows that the water just sits there. There's no way she would have floated 40 meters away from the edge. She was placed there. Anna would say that it started when her family started going to the church that John Paul was a pastor at. Her family would eventually leave that church because they started seeing John Paul's narcissistic ways. And this is when John Paul started using his manipulative behaviors on Mica. At this point, Anna says that John Paul started to isolate her from her friends and family. Anna says that eventually Mica was ready to leave him. She was going to leave him. Mica was in the fight for her life. She was going to go to war, and she was ready to go to war. Anna would even express to people that when Mica died, that John Paul sent a message in the group chat blaming the family for Mica's death. Destiny, who is Mica's sister, would state, "We would like someone else to take over or take another look into what really happened, because we do not believe that everything that has happened has come out." Investigators were able to find surveillance footage of Mica the day of her death. This gave investigators a very good timeline of the events leading up to Mica's death. At 11:48 that morning, Mica can be seen leaving her place via Ring camera footage. At 12:13, Mica can be seen entering a Dick's pawn shop where she would then purchase a gun. At 1:27 p.m., Mica can be seen entering a gas station where she buys an energy drink along with filling up her vehicle. At 2:54 p.m., this is when 911 operators would get a phone call from Mica warning them that she was about to harm herself. John Paul has denied any involvement in Mica's death. He explains that him and Mica's family have gotten into several arguments about Mica taking her medication for her alleged unaliving thoughts. He said if doctors, especially 7 doctors, especially nurses and counselors, all say this woman needs to take medication or she's going to unalive herself, you tend to believe them, especially when she comes off the medication, she tries to unalive herself. When asked why Mica's family would say that he was abusive towards Mica, John Paul's response was that Mica's family would do anything for money. He stated Mica loved her family, but she did not trust them as far as you could spit. John Paul Miller would then put out a petition to be appointed the trustee of Mica's estate. 3 months after Mica's death, John Paul and the Francis family would come to an agreement on Mica's estate. The agreement was that Sarah Francis would relinquish her request to be the special advisor over Mica's estate and that position would be appointed to John Paul. This agreement also came with the clause that the Francis family could not pursue any wrongful death lawsuits against John Paul, which was allegedly what they were thinking about doing. Russell B. Long, who was John Paul's lawyer, would state that the Francis family, Pastor Miller, and the church have set their differences aside so that way Mica's memory can live on. Unfortunately, we do not know every piece of information leading up to Mica's death, but we do know her life served a purpose. Regina Ward, Mica's family's lawyer, would state, "We do not want the Francis family or anyone to be dragged through litigation for years. I know that some of you are going to be disappointed. We want to put this behind us and move on to the next chapter that matters. When we say that we've gotten justice for Mica as a result of the settlement, it is true." Regina also introduced Mica's Law in hopes of getting it passed in North Carolina. Mica's family gathered a collection of her writings and her journals and her verbal stories in what they call Mica's List. Mica's List is an example of what abusive cohesive control is. A few examples of what abusive cohesive control is isolating somebody from their friends and family, depriving a person of basic needs, financial abuse, threatening to expose personal information are just some of the few examples of what that is. And Mica's Law would make it a criminal offense for an individual to use those pattern of behaviors to intimidate and isolate an individual. Since Mica's death, John Paul has been relieved of his pastor duties, but as of today, he has not been charged in the connection of Mica's death. Goodbye, Earthlings, and that is the end of today's video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, be safe, Earthlings. Peace out.